Jesus and the book of the history of the early church. Paul knew that I had access to all the important Christians who were still alive. He introduced me to them. But he also knew I needed access to information that he had written down through the years and access to the scriptures that weren't available to most people. He watched me do examinations. He knew that I was meticulous, acquiring every scrap of information I could before making a medical pronouncement. Now, the most valuable scrolls were made of parchments, which were stitched together animal skins. Cheaper writings were done on papyrus, which were not nearly as durable. Paper wasn't available in Israel until almost 1,000 years after my time. Which brings me to Julius Caesar, who died about 100 years before I met Paul. Julius Caesar was Rome's first dictator, and that title is it's a play on words. A dictator is a political official who tells people what to do, but the title was derived from someone who tells scribes what to write down by dictating to them. Julius Caesar was famous for being able to dictate multiple letters at the same time to multiple scribes. Scribes were important because they took down dictation on cheap papyrus or old parchments and then smoothed over the language and copied it to more expensive parchments and scrolls. A good scribe was invaluable. Paul dictated many of his letters. He would pace around and say what he had to say, and one of his assistants would copy it down, often in shorthand. Then the assistants would write it down on expensive material, and after Paul approved it, the letter would be sent. I'm not saying I was the world's best scribe or that I ever took dictation from Paul, but if you were to infer such a thing, that would be totally reasonable. I spent years writing about and listening to the story of important Christians. I combined them to make up the books of the Bible known as Luke and Acts. So, when you're reading those books, you're hearing the echoes of the personal stories and reliable witnesses, as well as hearing my own eyewitness accounts. You see, I traveled with Paul for many years, but that part of my story is going to have to wait. Many experts think I may be a literary genius. Humbling, really. And that's where I differ from most Greeks, who are well-known braggarts. The experts point out that the Greek phrasing in some of my passages is of the highest quality. Some of them quibble a bit that I use too many medical terms. I am a doctor. It was imperative to me that I wrote Luke and Acts well, because I wrote them to my friend and benefactor, Theophilus. I knew if he liked the books, he'd have his copyists make more copies than I could ever afford to do. You can only imagine how expensive hand copying such lengthy scrolls. Not everybody in the world has read my first book, but hundreds of millions of people have. It's even attained the title Gospel of Luke. I would not have named it after me, but I'm not entirely surprised that others found it useful to do so. Anyway, the book is about the life of Jesus. I cleverly fit his entire story onto just one scroll. Granted, the scroll was as long as practical, but I had a lot to write about. Since Theophilus loved my first book, and since Paul was really wanting me to write a follow-up, I ended up writing a second book that my fans fondly called The Acts of the Apostles, or to my real fans, Acts. It's also so long that it just barely fits onto one scroll, but that just shows how creative I can be if needed. I know some people think that Acts just ends so abruptly, right? That I just quit when I ran out of room on the scroll, but that simply shows they don't understand the importance of having a concise ending to a well-written story. Now, Acts covers the period of time of the ascension of Jesus in about 30 AD until Paul's first imprisonment in Rome in about 60 AD. It spans the time of emperors Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Nero was one of the most evil emperors of ancient Rome. A great fire broke out near Circus Maximus at 64 AD. Most of the structures in Rome were wood, and the fire was out of control, burned for days, consuming much of the city. Nero supposedly cavorted about during its burning. According to one historian, Nero blamed the fire on the early Christians and started the first persecution of them. There is reason to doubt the veracity of the historian's claim, but it happened after the period I covered in the book of Acts.